I think the degree to which we're willing to practice self-compassion is the degree to which we'll achieve greater performance and life satisfaction.
Welcome to The Shift, where we search for ways to do better by thinking better.
Whether you're going through a major life change, looking to deepen your understanding of yourself, or hoping to improve your relationships with others, The Shift is here for you.
We're your hosts, Isla and Yashar, an endlessly curious sister and brother team.
As certified brain-based executive coaches with backgrounds in medicine and management, we combine the neurosciences, performance psychology, strategic planning methodology, and mindfulness techniques to empower your transformation from the inside out.
Join us in conversation as we explore better ways to show up for ourselves and each other. Welcome back to The Shift, friends. Today's topic is self-compassion, and we feel like gratitude. This is one that people use a lot, but maybe don't have a keen understanding of what it means, how to use it, what accounts for it, and what doesn't. And this actually is one of Yashar's babies. This is one of the topics he deep dives with you in your private sessions. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Yashar to get us started on this vital topic, really an essential ingredient to any type of healing work that you're doing, any type of growth, any type of performance optimization. This is one ingredient you can't miss. So Yashar, get us started on today's topic of self-compassion.
I think you said it really well. I think the degree to which we're willing to practice self-compassion is the degree to which we'll achieve greater performance and life satisfaction. And that's a statement that I only came to learn through my own understanding of self-compassion, my own trials and tribulations with self-compassion, and then, of course, coaching many people through the ideas and the science of what self-compassion really means. And in a time where we speak about mindset training and specifically mental toughness training, this is a term I hear a lot of. There's so much everyday vernacular about this type of subject matter, but I think we're very limited in our view of what these things actually mean. And I think we miss the mark when we talk about mental toughness training and we think it's about beating our chest and like running through brick walls all the time. I think to really be mentally tough and resilient, we actually have to be incredibly gifted and versed in self-compassion. These misconceptions surrounding this topic and this dismissal of this tool is unfortunate because, like I said, self-compassion literally has the power to increase your performance in any area that you're interested in increasing your performance in, not just professionally at work, but also personally in intimate relationships with yourself and with the loved ones around you, and of course, in your health. But the easy part is saying all this, right? Like I can read the research, I can spew it back, and we can all feel good about that. But it's an exercise in futility because self-compassion only works when we practice it. Self-compassion only works like exercise when we do the work, when we get sweaty and move our bodies and actually challenge the muscle. And in this case, it's our heart muscle, if you will, and our mind muscle, and trying to unite them so that we treat ourselves first and foremost with the love and respect and guidance and coaching to move through challenges in a way that makes ourselves proud. So that's what I thought would be worth spending some time discussing today on this episode. So as I say that, Isla, what would you say is your relationship or your understanding of self-compassion?
I mean, it has to be said that it's an ever evolving journey and relationship. I think that we all probably have different relationships to compassion, and maybe some of us, and I know for myself, can extend it easier to others. And so learning how to extend that back to myself has been, both pivotal and still challenging because it requires you to also unlearn a lot of the ways you've been doing things. And again, like we've probably talked about on other podcasts, if you have kind of this martyrdom, narrative that has been celebrated within you, there's a tension that builds when you are building your self-compassion muscles because you actually feel that, there's almost selfishness to it because you have so much unlearning to do on what this actually means and how to practice it appropriately and with grace. I mean, to think that you're going to just be done and ready and like learn all the things is a falsehood. We know that this is a constant journey, and that things come up in time where you constantly have to relearn it. I had situations in the last little while where I had to extend myself some self-compassion in areas that, I didn't know, but they were only unveiled through certain situations and dynamics that I had to come back to these lessons and say, like, what does it look like now? And how am I going to use this tool now in this setting? You know, you might perfect it in certain settings and then be offered another space and time where you're like, oof, and you have to reevaluate and go in your toolbox and figure out how to use the tools now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think many people also have trouble maybe identifying or self-identifying if they are low in self-compassion or even knowing what self-compassion is. So I wanted to try something. I want to try a short self-assessment on this episode so that people can hear 7 questions and kind of give themselves a quick rating on those 7 questions to see if they rank low in self-compassion or not. And you can do it, Isla, as well. You don't have to give your answers if you don't want, but I thought this might be a good way to get people understanding what self-compassion is if they're low on self-compassion. And then we can get into the definition of self-compassion and the components of it and some of the science behind it. Does that sound fair?
It does. I'm taking out my notebook for my
Okay.
quiz.
Okay. All right, good. So, like I said, there's 7 questions. We're going to go through them fairly quickly. It's not a perfect science here, but I want, if you're listening, you're interested, for you to have a sense of where you rank when it comes to self-compassion. So here are some indicators. From a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being absolutely always and 1 being never, what would you rank for yourself? When times are really difficult, I tend to be tough on myself. When times are really difficult, I tend to be tough on myself. Second question is, I'm intolerant and impatient towards those aspects of my personality I don't like. I'm intolerant and impatient towards those aspects of my personality I don't like. Number 3, when I'm feeling down, I tend to feel like most other people are probably happier than I am. When I'm feeling down, I tend to feel like most other people are probably happier than I am. Again, just a gut reaction, 10 being all the time, 1 being never. Where would you rank yourself? Number 4, when I fail at something that's important to me, I tend to feel alone in my failure. When I fail at something that's important to me, I tend to feel alone in my failure. Number 5, even when I reach my stated goals, I still feel dissatisfied or lose my satisfaction soon thereafter. Even when I reach my stated goals, I still feel dissatisfied or lose my satisfaction soon thereafter. Number 6, I tend to self-sabotage. I tend to self-sabotage. And the last one, number 7, I self-identify as a perfectionist. I self-identify as a perfectionist. Okay, and so like I said, this is not a perfect science. It's just a quick survey of indicators. I would, quickly tally up your answers. And if you average above 5, then I would say you're probably trending towards having lower self-compassion. And if you're trending below 5, I would say that you're probably higher in self-compassion. And I think if people are honest with themselves, if you're being honest with yourself as you do this, you'll probably be in a little bit of a tug of war, because sometimes you feel you're very much like this. Sometimes you feel like you're very much not like this. And there's, like I said, it's not perfect science, but there's an averaging out of where you feel like you mostly hang out in your own psychology. And so most often when I do this with individuals, I've done it with one-on-one and I've done it in large groups. Most often people do tend to move towards needing to work on self-compassion, especially with people who put a lot of expectation on themselves, whether we want to call that high performance, or people who want to optimize their performance or hack their way to being better in health, life, mindset, relationships, work, whatever. We tend to push hard. And the interesting thing is that the science will prove over and over and over again that the better you are at self-compassion, again, the better you are at performing in those areas of your life that are most important to you. And that's why I'm so interested in this subject matter. It's not one that I actually got into out of interest of self-compassion. I got into it out of interest of optimizing performance, which then, brought me through the back door to self-compassion. And it was kind of, made me face the reality that, oops, maybe I'm missing something in my own toolbox when I keep saying that I want to be better at things or stronger in certain areas of my life. And it's one that I know I have to wrestle with on the daily one that doesn't naturally come to me. And so that's where my passion and excitement for this topic matter really lies in. And so I'm going to pause here and ask you, Ayla, you don't have to give us your answers, but did you surprise yourself maybe with some of the responses and or average that came up for you?
Yeah, I think first thing that surprised me were the questions themselves. I think that I wouldn't even identify them as self-compassion questions. So that in it of itself to me was kind of surprising. I'm like, wait, this doesn't belong here. Don't be asking me about that. That's like not about self-compassion. And it was kind of like, hey, like that's let's not talk about that. So that to me in it of itself was kind of hilarious of a reaction beyond the answer themselves. And the idea that you're saying that like people would get below 5, I'm like, who? Who are these superheroes that are getting below 5? So if you're one of those superheroes, send us a message. I want to talk to you. I want to know what skills you have that you are scoring below 5 on most of these. So I had a couple fives, and the fives I feel like were generous because I think a couple years ago I wouldn't even give myself 5. I would have definitely given myself higher. So the fives I was like, I'm doing good. So I had a couple fives. I had maybe 2 that fell below 5, which felt nice. And I also believe I can see the shift in how I would see that today versus how I would see that even maybe last year. So yeah, there was a couple of the answers that I had like a 3 and a 4, which I felt really great about. And the other were all above 5. I had a 6, I had a 7, I even had an 8. I had 8 for number 4. If I'm going to be really vulnerable and transparent here, if you want to tell people what question 4 is, because I don't remember, I scored my highest pain point there because I scored an 8 there.
Yeah, number 4 is when I fail at something that's important to me, I tend to feel alone in my failure.
Yeah, there you go. That I scored an 8 there. I think most high performers will probably resonate with, having a little more tension with that question. I think there is something that I've learned with working with so many high performers over the years, being those ourselves, is that success, in quotations, whatever that means to you, or kind of achievement, was built out of a space of safety that we maybe don't talk about as often. Like our need to do all these things and be all these things were also ways to keep us safe and relevant and loved, really. And so when you start to kind of unveil these for yourself, you realize the root is all about belonging anyways. And I think when you unveil that, that's actually how the conversation of self-compassion starts. You're like, I didn't need all of these accolades. I didn't need all these advanced degrees. I mean, go do them if that's what you want and you love. But I think there is a conversation that needs to take place when we aren't thinking about this, especially seeing my scoring on those particular questions. The idea of failure or not performing at your best, that's where self-compassion comes with the most tension, right? Because you have another voice inside of you that says, go push, you can sleep when you're dead, that kind of feeling. And that is the part of this rewriting of our stories that we have to really work on. A lot of the times, most of our clients, the thing we're working most on when you're coming to optimize your performance is we're actually working on your softness, and these soft skills such as self-compassion, because we realize you almost have this overgrowth of these like toughness muscles, but all of the other ones have been less utilized and are weaker. And those are the supporting systems that allow you to do the big climbs, so you don't end up in places of self-sabotage, etc. And when we find people in like cycles of self-sabotage, having great things come into their life and going back to old ways and old narratives and like, pushing it out and picking their old ways and believing they just have to tough it out, it's because these muscles have not been healed and worked on.
I would agree with that. And a question that everyone can ask themselves after doing an exercise like this is, what type of suffering is within you that you feel called to transform? Again, it's about doing the work to move through the suffering in a certain and specific way. And a follow-up question to that in my mind is, why is becoming self-compassionate important to you? Why would you want to be more self-compassionate? And that might be a harder question to answer without understanding what self-compassion is really about. However, if we're being honest with ourselves and we do see the suffering within us. And we are the type of individual that wants to transform that suffering, not bypass it, not beat our chest and pretend it doesn't exist, but truly transform it, which is very difficult work to do and often needs support and time as main ingredients for that transformation. The question again is, why would I put my energy towards self-compassion as a tool to help me transform that? And to answer that question, I guess, let's go through what a definition or definitions of self-compassion are, what it's not, and then kind of the components, high level, which researchers look at to identify if someone's more or less self-compassionate in their lives. So the first definition I'd like to give of what self-compassion is from Kristen Neff. She's a PhD researcher. I say the godmother, if you will, of self-compassion in many ways. I've learned the most from her. She's really been the foundational individual that has taught me most about self-compassion and the science behind it. So look that name up, NEFF, if you're interested in learning about self-compassion. She has a lot of articles and tangible resources that one can work through. Her definition of self-compassion is extending compassion to yourself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering. So extending compassion to yourself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering. It's a great definition. It's her definition. Like I said, she's the godmother, if you will. So based on how I have learned how it could apply to me and how I work with others with this tool, especially again, because I am working in a high performance kind of optimization world, I found different words that have resonated more deeply for me. It's a build off of her definition, but also in a way that I can share it with others who are maybe not as quick or eager to step into a tool like self-compassion. And the definition of self-compassion that I like to give is a state of thinking and feeling that prepares the individual to take positive, empowered, and deliberate action. So a state of thinking and feeling that prepares the individual to take positive, empowered, and deliberate action. So if we combine the two definitions, there's this idea where you perceive something went wrong, and then there's this approach to that perception with compassion. In my lens, that would be, again, of thinking and feeling that allows you to step into the situation by taking a positive and empowered and deliberate action step forward. And so I hope by the end of this episode, you'll understand how these definitions can be married to one another and how they work with one another. And also how maybe not simple in behavior all the time, but in simple and understanding it could be to get yourself to be in a positive, empowered, and deliberate place so you can take the next best step forward. When I read those definitions to you, Ida, what comes up for you?
So I think the critical element for me is that knowing that most people are probably coming at this probably from a perfectionist stance. The deepest place of self-compassion for me is knowing that like you're going to get it wrong. So for me, the deepest tool of self-compassion is recovery, which means like I did my best, whatever my best looked like at that time, given place, and it was valid for X amount of reasons. And now looking back, I see things that I could have done differently. And so I will not avoid that. I will not run away from it. Instead, I will face it and think of ways to repair it within myself, within that relationship, within that context, whatever it is. And so that's how I see this whole formula, if it were, is giving yourself space to have that type of conversation versus old narrative that says, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't need to look at it. Or I did everything wrong. I'm a failure. Like it's neither actually. Like, go back to podcast number like 1, there's no good and bad, right and wrong. It's really about shades in which we check in with our values and take our agency back, really. In all these settings, you're giving your power away to something else or someone else. So what it is taking your agency back, rooting your agency in your values, in your core values. Like what really matters to you? And from that place, making the decision with grace and space. So you're offering yourself self-compassion because you're investing in the ability to repair, believing that you yourself can evolve, and offering yourself grace in times of strain or challenge or mistake, knowing that's not the only answer, giving yourself another opportunity to evolve.
Yeah, I think that's a major theme that runs through all of this for sure. And to capture that major theme, let's talk about the three components of self compassion so that we can ground this conversation further in more practical steps. So, the first component of self compassion that I want to speak to is this general idea of being mindful or mindfulness. And again, it's another word that comes with a lot of ideas and maybe feels out of reach for some people. However, mindfulness simply means being aware, being curious, being present, accepting what is, acknowledging what is, giving permission to feel and experience your inner dialogue about what is. And when we do this, this is what starts to activate the part of our mind that can hold space for the distress you're experiencing. It works as a buffer where you're not necessarily attaching or overly attaching to what you're feeling or seeing, and you're not dismissing. You're trying to just stay present with it. And as I say this, I'm sure you can understand how much of a skill set this alone is, right? Where we practice, and that's the whole point of breath work and mindfulness activities and exercises, is to be in a space without running wild with your narrative about that space. And like I said, or on the other extreme, denying it. And Isla, you alluded to a lot of that as you spoke to what you find interesting about self-compassion. So this first tool is how curious, how aware, how present, how accepting, how much permission am I giving myself to be with my inner dialogue so that I can start to create a buffer, so that I can start to begin the work that's necessary to get further into self-compassion. And like I said, I use breath work as my main tool to be in this space. However, I've also said this in other episodes, I use a lot of body movement. I call exercise therapy. It's not just my opinion. The science would agree with me. I do so much processing in the gym. I think through so many problems, my personal life, my professional life, my inner thoughts, my goals, my dreams, whatever. There's so much untangling that happens when I move my body. So mindfulness, awareness doesn't have to just be sitting on a meditation cushion in a corner. You know, people access it through art, through cooking, through writing, through movement, through dance, through music. You know, find your way, but allow yourself to be in a space that doesn't judge nor dismiss what's coming up for you. So that's the first component of self-compassion, which is mindfulness.
Not overly attaching and not dismissing. What a fine balance.
Tightrope.
Yeah. I mean, just picture any challenge you have right now in your life. Like, think of anything that's irking you. Think of anything that's under your skin. Think of anything that you're having trouble with. Think of anything that's ruminating in your mind over and over lately. Okay. Take a moment. You know what it is. Think of that person, place, or thing that's happening inside you. And just listen to this statement. How can you not overly attach to it? And how can you not dismiss it? Like, I mean, I feel like we're screwed. That's so difficult because, like, again, all of these theories sound so fun, so flowery, so, innovative. But then put yourself in the situation that's irking you right now, that's making you crazy, and then try it. And you feel the tension. Like, you definitely feel the tension. You're like, what does that mean? How do I not dismiss this? How do I not overly attach? And that you can feel the work. You can feel the conversations that you're going to have with yourself. If you have a coach, you can do it with your coach. If you have a therapist, wonderful. But you can feel that. But really, with yourself, that's an open door for a conversation. When I'm looking at this, how can I do it with an open heart and mind, with curiosity? When you feel that tension, I would say ask yourself what you need to help you gain some semblance of the sweet spot between these two. That's probably an open door for a lot of insights.
I would agree fully. And what I would add to that is the next two components of self-compassion help guide that conversation you're speaking to.
Let's go.
So number two is common humanity. Common humanity is an antidote to the isolating thoughts that you just spoke to about suffering that can fill our heads. When we are hurting, we often are in a perpetual lie about the suffering and about the isolation that comes with that suffering. So common humanity is the antidote to that, because common humanity connects us, or should I say reconnects us, to the truth of being a human being and understanding that challenge and failure are universal truths for all of us. And one that leaders or high performers, or generally people who give a lot of care about what they're doing in their life and want to face what they're doing in their life in a better way, will face. You have to imagine that if you're a leader, by definition, you're going first. You're stumbling first. You're trying things first. You're guiding and helping and shaping others through challenges as well. If you're a high performer, you're pushing boundaries. So anytime you're doing these things, you're going to fall. You're going to fail. It's just baked in to the reality. And so when we can use common humanity after we bring awareness or mindfulness to our suffering, then we can understand and reconnect to the universal truth that this is part of the situation that we all live in, and it's not unique to ourselves. So a question I fall back on when I'm working through this is, who else knows this pain? I like asking that question because it opens up my perspective a little bit. A different way of asking that is, am I the only one that has ever faced this type of challenge? I would say that 99.9% of every situation you've ever faced in your life, if not 100%, there are others who have faced similar challenges. So you're not alone in it, right? It's just the isolating thought of stress, sadness, depression, anxiety, challenge that can push us to think we're alone in it. And so when we ask ourselves, who else knows this pain? Am I the only one who has ever faced this type of challenge? We quickly snap ourselves back into the humanity that we live in and can connect to within ourselves.
One of my best friends constantly says to me, nothing is special and everything is special. And I think this is where this lies, is this idea that it all means everything and it all means nothing. And there's like a tension with that, but it also allows us to take away the gloss and varnish of our human experience a little bit and remind ourselves of more that connects us than separates us. Again, looking at things in the most generous way allows us to ease some of the hardship and the pain.
And it helps us then move into the third component, which is self-kindness. So I want to say right off the hop, what this is not is how I imagine one speaks to their dog or their cat or their goldfish, that kind of, oh, Fido, little poochie bear, I'm so sorry you hurt your paw. That kind of coddling language, that kind of like energy. This is not what self-kindness is about. So I have to start there, because whenever these words come up, I feel like there's these general ideas that pop up very quickly in one's mind. What self-kindness is all about is languaging and cognitive reframing of the narrative in a way that's so much more about being responsible and caring for your mental and physical well-being. It's the way you would speak to a friend or a colleague or a family member that you really deeply care about. I'll share a quick story about this with a client that I was working on, because this individual is very, very low on self-compassion. But I also knew about this individual is that they would go out and shovel the driveways of their neighbors. Meanwhile, this individual was, in their 60s, and some of their neighbors were much younger. I had this moment where we were struggling through this conversation, and this individual was not really feeling self-compassion. And I wanted to describe self-kindness in a way that would help this person move forward. So I simply said, how would you speak to your neighbors if they were struggling? And it was an automatic sense of duty, sense of holding space, sense of wanting to be, there for them. And this person switched right away and started showing up a lot more kind in their language, a lot more caring and holding space. And that was a turning point in our conversations where I could say, you see, this is what self-kindness is actually about. And our tool now is to turn it inwards. And with all our clients, Island, you would know this, is when we do this correctly, when we connect to this idea, it becomes a powerful tool of self-coaching, where you're holding of space for yourself the way you would for someone else that you care deeply about. It's a really powerful place to be, and it doesn't come for free. It comes with a lot of work and understanding. And I always end with self-kindness as the third component, because I think without a level of mindfulness or awareness, without a level of the antidote of common humanity to snap us back into how we can show up to life, self-kindness doesn't actually bloom or blossom or become what it needs to be. And so I like to work through the mindfulness, through the common humanity, and then into self-kindness, so we can actually hold space for ourselves the way this tool or this component of self-compassion is really meant to do.
So there's stuff I want to add here, but before I do, I want to ask you, just for clarity's sake, what is the difference between self-compassion and self-kindness?
To be self-kind without mindfulness and common humanity can become like a mantra without roots. It becomes a self-affirmation. It becomes this feeling of, I will say good things. Well, I know I shouldn't say that to myself, so I'll say the prettier thing to myself. But there's no grounding, there's no roots, there's no understanding, there's no purpose, and no drive for those words. And with mindfulness and common humanity, the self-kindness comes from a more pure, authentic, and desirable state.
From a more grounded state.
Yes.
Okay, so the main thing that came to me when you were talking about self-kindness and really the whole self-compassion formula is self-worth. Again, we can reference the episodes. We talk about self-worth really in depth. We have 2 episodes. We did a double episode on it. It was so important. But I think when you were giving me that example of how the client, treated their neighbors versus themselves, it's really rooted in self-worth, which goes back to the original thing I was saying about all the things we do to be loved, which again, like I said, we have podcast episodes, we'll link them below. But it's a deeper conversation that I am worthy of caring for myself. My worth is not tied to me only caring for others. My worth is not tied to me only being everyone's savior. Like, part of this conversation is really reestablishing your self-worth, that you are worthy of these things. You're worthy of them from yourself first, and then obviously from the right people in your life, the right team, the right partners. But the first part of that conversation is knowing that you are worthy of better care, patience, all of these things that you are bestowing on others. You are worthy of receiving them, again, first from yourself, and then hopefully from whoever is in your circle.
I would agree again that self-worth is a huge foundational component for where self-compassion grows from. And so, as a recap of these 3 components of self-compassion, mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness, if you're listening closely, you could probably start to feel that when you put the work in and start to develop self-compassion this way, we do enter into a state of thinking and feeling that prepares us to take positive, empowered, and deliberate action, like the definition I gave off of the start of this episode. So the goal of this episode is for self-compassion not to be this esoteric, intangible idea, but a very grounded tool where you can take these steps so that you can show up to your challenges, to your hopes in a way that makes you much more equipped to get through it, but also, and importantly, treating yourself the way that you deserve to be treated.
My personal relationship with self-compassion over, I would say, the last year, and especially over the last 6 months, probably has been comprised of 2 main elements. Number one, I mentioned, was about like generosity in the way we hear and the way we speak, like betting on the best parts, instead of letting the old narratives kind of drive this. So grounding this in generosity as a value of how I hear and how I listen and how I talk to myself and how I talk to others has been critical to allow this shift to occur. The other component that is newer, that has actually been guiding me in most of my interactions, has been the concept of harm reduction. With all our big feelings and all our doubts and all these components that are coming in through self-sabotage and perfectionism and all of this noise, and again, going in, like I say, for me, I go in for repair often with my kids, with my personal relationships. I just choose repair. But that repair component is based on this principle of harm reduction. Again, because I'm looking at every situation now with a deeper generosity, I actively ask, how can I reduce harm? And in doing so, I'm reducing harm for myself, because we are all hurting. We're all struggling. We're all trying our best. We're all unsure. We're all scared. We're all overwhelmed. We all want these big things and are also simultaneously terrified of them. So, as like my role in this with myself and others, the thing I ask is, what is the thing that reduces harm? And again, if you're doing through that lens of generosity, and if your value is harm reduction, when you come at the self-compassion tools, it really grounds it in a way of like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. It really silences those old ways, where the ego is really loud, where the pride is really loud, where all the old stories and heartbreaks are kind of overwhelming your system. If you come at it with this idea of generosity and harm reduction, because ultimately in all our work we're doing together is we want a better way, right? The old way isn't what we want. We want a better way. We want the way that we originally wanted, but all this noise in our life kind of effed it up and made us all build these muscles that aren't serving us. So our goal now is to build the muscles that will serve us. And in doing so, these are the critical ingredients to make those steps forward. And then ideally build more peace and ease and obviously grace with how we all go about treating ourselves and each other. Thank you for listening, friends. What shifted for you during this episode? We'd love to hear your insights. Write us with any questions, commentary, or episode ideas at theshift@mindshiftleadership.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we would deeply appreciate a like and subscribe.
The Shift is brought to you by Mindshift Leadership, a heart-centered, evidence-based, mindset-powered leadership company, empowering you with the training to prioritize mental health, inclusion, and performance optimization.